They claim the wailing carried across mountains. The summer heat of 1462, suffocating, you march with the Sultan's legions, the finest war machine the world has ever assembled. Constantinople crumbled beneath your banners. Empires dissolved at your approach. Now a minor rebellion in some forgotten corner called Wallachia, a principality barely worth the name. This should end before it begins, then the wind shifts. Something rancid crawls into your lungs, decay, rot, and beneath it, something your mind refuses to recognize. The column grinds to a halt. Scouts have gone silent ahead. You round the hillside overlooking the capital, and comprehension fractures. What stretches before you resembles a forest, but these are not trees, these are men. 20,000 of your brothers, your comrades, suspended on sharpened timber in formations so precise they might have been planted by a gardener. Some corpses have blackened weeks ago, swollen beyond recognition. Others still writhe, still breathe, still scream into the indifferent sky. Your Sultan, the conqueror who shattered Byzantium itself, observes this tableau for one long, terrible moment, then wheels his entire army homeward without a word. What architecture of thought produces such a thing? Here is the part that should chill your blood. This was not insanity. This was warfare, coldly deliberate, horrifyingly successful. The legend you believe about Vlad the Impaler, it conceals the truth. Not because the events are fiction, but because reality cuts deeper than any myth. What follows is the complete account of how a single human weaponized suffering with such precision that empires recoiled. By the end, you will grasp why the true nightmare was never the destruction of flesh. It was the shattering of minds. Begin with the question no one dares ask. What fractures a soul so completely that it becomes capable of engineering hell? The year, 1442, Vlad is 11 winters old. His father, Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Dragon, has brokered a transaction with damnation, not metaphorical damnation. Actual damnation with a name and a throne. Sultan Murad II of the Ottoman Empire. The arrangement is elegantly simple. Vlad II retains his precarious crown in Wallachia. The price? His two youngest sons delivered as breathing collateral to ensure obedience. Young Vlad and his brother Radu, torn from everything familiar, transported into the heart of Ottoman power. Not imprisoned in dungeons. No, worse, they are made guests in palaces at Edirne, later egregores, fine silks draped over their shoulders. Education in languages, philosophy, the Quran, military training. From the surface, privilege, but here is what the chronicles omit. This was not education. This was the slow dismantling of a child's mind. Vlad spent his formative years, 11 to 17, observing his captors perfect the machinery of empire. He studied how the Ottomans wielded fear like a scalpel. He witnessed executions designed not merely to punish, but to traumatize entire populations into paralysis. He learned that terror, when administered with surgical care, surpassed any standing army in effectiveness, and he absorbed something else: his own absolute helplessness. While his younger brother Radu adapted, even cultivating intimacy with the Sultan's own son maimed, Vlad resisted. Ottoman court records document his frequent punishment for defiance. Some accounts whisper of beatings, perhaps torture. The specifics dissolved into time's shadows, but this remains certain. Something fundamental shattered within him during those years, or perhaps crystallized. He developed what modern psychology might recognize as a persecution complex fused with an obsessive hunger for control. But he focused it. Every punishment absorbed, he dissected. Every torture technique witnessed, he catalogued. A mental armory assembled piece by agonizing piece. 1448. After 6 years of captivity, Vlad returned to Wallachia, 17 years old. 2 months later, his father was butchered by rival boyars, nobles who auctioned their loyalty between Ottomans and Hungarians. His older brother Mircea buried alive while still breathing. Vlad stood alone, encircled by enemies, backed by nothing. Here the narrative shifts. He did not merely crave revenge. He intended to remake the world in the image of his own trauma. Every lesson the Ottomans had branded into him about terror. He would refine it into something even they had never conceived. But first, he waited 6 more years in exile, plotting, studying military tactics, political maneuvering. 1456. With Hungarian backing, he finally seized the Wallachian throne. The monster was no longer waiting to be born. It was already breathing. If you are drawn to the documented breaking points that forged history's most notorious minds, subscribe now. We are only beginning to trace how this fractured child became something far worse than those who broke him. Vlad's coronation banquet in 1456 should have marked celebration. Instead, it became the template for everything that followed. He summoned the boyar families, the same aristocracy who orchestrated his father's murder, who sealed his brother underground while life still flickered in him. Hundreds arrived in ceremonial finery, assuming they would pledge fealty to the new prince. The great hall gleamed. Wine flowed like rivers. Then, mid-feast, Vlad rose and posed a single question. "How many princes of Wallachia have you outlived?" The elder boyars answered with pride. Some boasted of surviving a dozen different rulers. They were advertising their adaptability, their cunning, their talent for outlasting any prince foolish enough to claim the throne. Vlad smiled. Then he issued an order. Every boyar who had answered was seized immediately. But here you glimpse the methodical intelligence at work. He did not execute them, not yet. Instead, he divided them into 2 categories based on age and physical condition. The older ones, the architects of his family's annihilation, were impaled immediately outside the palace walls, not swiftly. The stakes were positioned to avoid vital organs, ensuring death would arrive slowly. Over hours, perhaps days. Their screams became the soundtrack for what unfolded next. The younger, stronger boyars and their families were stripped of their noble garments and force-marched 50 miles north to the ruins of Ponari Castle. There, they received a choice that was no choice at all. Rebuild this fortress with bare hands. Or die. For months, they dragged stones up mountainsides. They labored until their hands split open, until their fine clothes rotted into rags, until exhaustion dropped them where they stood. Most perished during construction. The survivors, broken beyond recognition. Vlad had systematically erased the old nobility, replacing them with a new class who owed their existence entirely to him, and lived in absolute terror of his displeasure. This was not merely vengeance. This was the calculated dismantling of the power structure that had rendered Wallachia weak. And it exposed something crucial about Vlad's psychology. He did not simply demand obedience. He required people broken so thoroughly that obedience became their only conceivable response. But this remained domestic politics. The boyars were Wallachian. What Vlad orchestrated next would echo across empires. 1459. Sultan maimed yes, the same maimed who had been Vlad's childhood companion, dispatched envoys to Wallachia demanding the annual tribute Vlad's father had sworn to pay. The demand carried an additional insult. Vlad was to present himself personally in Constantinople to renew his oath of vassalage. The envoys arrived expecting customary political theater, perhaps negotiation, maybe a counteroffer. What they received was a preview of damnation. When they entered Vlad's court and refused to remove their turbans, a genuine religious custom in Ottoman protocol, Vlad requested they explain their tradition. They complied, likely relieved he seemed interested rather than offended. Vlad nodded thoughtfully. Then he spoke words that must have frozen their blood. "I respect a man who honors his faith so completely. Allow me to help you honor it. Forever." He ordered his guards to nail the turbans directly into their skulls. Consider the precision of that cruelty. He did not kill them. He mutilated them in a manner both symbolically loaded and medically calculated to ensure survival for the journey back to Constantinople. They became walking messages, their screams trailing them across the countryside as they fled toward the Sultan. When Maimed received his envoys, these men he had sent in good faith, now permanently disfigured and driven half-mad by agony, he understood immediately. This was not the childhood friend he remembered. This was something new, something that had absorbed Ottoman lessons in terror and evolved them into forms even the Ottomans had never imagined. War became inevitable. But before that war arrived, Vlad had more messages to deliver. Here is what most observers misunderstand about impalement. It was not merely execution, it was engineering. The common image, a stake driven straight through the torso, would produce death almost instantly. That defeats the entire purpose. Vlad's methodology was far more sophisticated and infinitely more cruel. Based on contemporary medical analysis of the descriptions and surviving Ottoman accounts, here is how it functioned. First, the victim was positioned face down. The stake, carefully selected, rounded at the tip, thoroughly oiled, was inserted through the rectum. But here is the crucial detail. It was inserted at an angle specifically calculated to miss all major organs and blood vessels. The victim was then slowly raised upright, and gravity completed the work. Over hours, sometimes days, their own body weight forced the stake gradually upward through their torso. The path was engineered to avoid the heart, lungs, major arteries. In documented cases, the stake would eventually emerge through the shoulder or chest, but the victim could remain conscious for up to 3 days. Why this method? Because Vlad grasped something modern psychological warfare experts now confirm. Witnessing prolonged suffering traumatizes exponentially more than witnessing swift death. A battlefield beheading is horrific but brief. Impalement was a performance that lasted days, complete with screams that echoed across entire valleys, but the physical act was only one component. The true genius, if such a perverted word applies, resided in the staging. When Vlad impaled victims, he positioned them in public squares, along major roads, outside city gates, anywhere that maximized visibility. He understood that rumor and word of mouth would multiply the psychological impact far beyond the actual body count. One impalement witnessed by 100 people created 100 storytellers, each of whom would tell 100 more, and he refined the symbolism constantly. Stakes varied in height based on rank, peasants near the ground, nobles elevated, the highest reserved for enemy commanders. This created a grotesque visual hierarchy reinforcing his message. Everyone has a place in my world and everyone suffers according to their station. In some accounts, he arranged impaled victims in geometric patterns, circles, stars, concentric rings. This was not random sadism. This was a demonstration of control. It declared, "I possess so much power that I can transform human suffering into art." A German pamphlet from 1462, admittedly propaganda, but rooted in eyewitness accounts from Saxon merchants in Wallachia, describes Vlad dining among the impaled. He allegedly positioned a table in the middle of a field of stakes, consumed his meals surrounded by dying men, and appeared to relish the experience. Whether this specific incident occurred exactly as described remains debatable, but the psychological message is not debatable. I have transcended your understanding of human behavior so completely that your horror cannot touch me. The Saxons, who maintained their own complicated relationship with Vlad, circulated these pamphlets widely. They became some of the first mass-produced horror stories in European history, complete with woodcut illustrations. These images, crude but effective, spread across the continent and cemented Vlad's reputation. But here is the question no one was asking: was any of this working? Was terror actually effective as military strategy, or was Vlad simply a sadist with power? The answer arrived in the summer of 1462. And it would prove Vlad's methods were not just effective, they were devastatingly so. Sultan Maimed II had exhausted his patience. By early 1462, Vlad had not only refused tribute but launched raids deep into Ottoman territory south of the Danube. In one particularly brutal campaign, he crossed into Ottoman lands with a small force and, according to his own letter to the Hungarian king, killed over 23,000 people. He even maintained a body count, categorizing victims by age and gender. Maimed, who had conquered Constantinople at 21, who had crushed rebellion after rebellion, who commanded the most formidable military machine on earth, decided to personally resolve the Wallachian problem. Spring 1462, he assembled an army estimated between 60 and 90,000 men. The exact number dissolved into history, but even conservative estimates exceed triple Wallachia's entire military-age male population. This was not invasion. This was extermination. Vlad commanded perhaps 20 to 30,000 men total, many of them peasant conscripts with minimal training. A conventional battle would be slaughter. So Vlad executed what he had been planning since childhood. He refused to provide them a conventional battle. As the Ottoman army penetrated Wallachia, they discovered nothing: empty villages, poisoned wells, scorched fields. Every potential source of sustenance and water had been systematically obliterated. Vlad had ordered his own population to abandon their homes, retreat into forests and mountains, taking livestock with them. Ottoman supply lines stretched longer and longer, and then the night raids commenced. These were not typical skirmishes. Vlad had trained specialized units in guerrilla warfare. Small groups, perhaps 50 to 100 men, would strike Ottoman camps in dead darkness, killing sentries, igniting fires, vanishing before any organized response could form. They targeted supply wagons, pack animals, ammunition stores. The objective was not defeating the army. It was rendering them paranoid, exhausted, demoralized. But the masterpiece arrived on the night of June 17, 1462. Vlad had learned from captured Ottoman soldiers that Sultan Maimed himself camped near Targovist with his personal guard, the elite Janissaries, an opportunity that would never return. Vlad personally led a force of approximately 10,000 men in what history remembers as the night attack. Under darkness's cover, they infiltrated the massive Ottoman camp with one objective: kill the Sultan. Contemporary accounts describe absolute chaos. The Wallachians' war captured Ottoman uniforms, spoke enough Turkish to sow confusion. They set tents ablaze, stampeded horses, specifically targeted the section sheltering the Sultan's pavilion. They closed within yards of Maimed himself. Some historians believe Vlad and the Sultan briefly made eye contact across the burning camp. But the Janissaries held, forming a defensive ring around their leader. After hours of close-quarters slaughter, Vlad recognized he could not break through. He ordered retreat, and his men dissolved back into darkness as suddenly as they had materialized. Ottoman casualties were relatively light, perhaps 2,000 killed, though Ottoman sources minimized the numbers. But the psychological damage was catastrophic. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, surrounded by his own army, had nearly been assassinated by a vastly outnumbered enemy who struck from nowhere and evaporated like smoke. Maimed's commanders were shaken, his soldiers exhausted, and they remained weeks from Constantinople, marching through a dead landscape where every shadow might conceal an enemy. Then they reached the capital and witnessed what Vlad had been preparing for them. No written description fully captures what Maimed's army encountered approaching Targovist in late June 1462, but we can attempt it. Imagine you are an Ottoman soldier. You have marched for weeks through scorched earth. You are starving, exhausted, jumpy from constant night raids. You have not seen the enemy in days. They have simply vanished. That should reassure you. It feels like a trap. As you approach the Wallachian capital, the smell arrives first. If you have ever encountered a dead animal rotting in summer heat, multiply that by thousands. Then add the sweet, sickening odor of decomposing human flesh. It is so dense you can taste it on your tongue. Then you see the stakes, first one, then 10, then 100, then you realize there is no end. They stretch to the horizon in every direction. Contemporary accounts claim the field of impaled bodies extended nearly 2 miles in length, over half a mile in width. Modern historians debate exact numbers. Ottoman sources, likely minimizing for propaganda, claim 10,000. Wallachian and Hungarian sources claim up to 20,000. The truth probably rests between 15 and 20,000 impaled bodies. But here is what freezes your blood. This was not random. The stakes were arranged in precise geometric patterns, in concentric circles radiating from the capital, high-tortured rows. In some sections, they formed star patterns visible from elevated ground. Vlad had spent weeks, possibly months, preparing this. He had captured Ottoman soldiers and sympathizers from earlier raids and border skirmishes. He had kept them alive specifically for this purpose. Some bodies had rotted for weeks in summer heat. Others had been impaled more recently, and some, according to multiple sources, were still alive. The Byzantine chronicler Leonikos Chalkakondals, who interviewed eyewitnesses, documented that the moaning of the dying could be heard across the entire field. Some had been impaled for days, their bodies slowly consuming themselves, too weak to scream but still conscious. The Ottoman troops, hardened veterans who had conquered cities and slaughtered countless enemies, reportedly began vomiting. Some refused to advance further. Others deserted in darkness, willing to risk execution rather than continue through this nightmare. And at the center, on the tallest stake of all, Hamza Pasha, a high-ranking Ottoman commander captured in an earlier skirmish. His body, still dressed in remnants of military finery, positioned directly facing the route of the Sultan's approach. A personal message from Vlad to maimed. "This is what I do to your best men. Imagine what I will do to you." Sultan maimed I. Remember, this is the man who watched Constantinople's walls crumble beneath his cannons, who had ordered his own executions and massacres, reportedly stopped his horse and stared in silence for several minutes. Different sources record varying responses, but the most widely accepted comes from Chalkakondals. One cannot rule a country from a man who has done such great deeds, who shows such power. This was not praise, this was recognition. The Sultan was acknowledging he faced something he did not fully comprehend. A mind that had absorbed Ottoman methods and evolved them into forms even the Ottomans could not match. The military situation was already deteriorating. Supply lines overstretched, scorched earth tactics succeeding, night raids destroying morale, the Sultan's own commanders advising retreat. But the forest of the Impaled was the psychological breaking point. It proved conventional military thinking did not apply here. Vlad was not attempting to win battles. He was attempting to shatter minds, and it was working. Within days, Maimed ordered general retreat. He left a contingent under Vlad's younger brother Radu to continue harassment, but the Sultan himself withdrew with the main army. The most powerful military force in the world had invaded a tiny principality with overwhelming numbers, and been turned back not by military defeat but by sheer psychological warfare. Vlad the Impaler had won, but the story does not end there, because what follows reveals the ultimate tragedy. Terror, however effective short-term, always devours its wielder in the end. You would assume turning back the Ottoman Empire would render Vlad a hero in Christian Europe. In some ways, it did. The Hungarian king and the Pope praised his defense of Christendom, but here is what they failed to understand. Vlad could not deactivate it. The methods that defeated the Ottomans did not cease with the Ottomans. He deployed them on everyone. By late 1462, Vlad was impaling Wallachian merchants for price manipulation. He was impaling boyars suspected of disloyalty based on rumors. He was impaling entire villages for minor infractions. The tool he had forged to defeat a superior enemy had become his only tool for everything. His political position deteriorated rapidly. His brother Radu, backed by Ottoman gold and soldiers, positioned himself as the rational alternative. Hungarian support evaporated as Vlad's increasingly erratic behavior alienated his allies. By November 1462, mere months after his greatest triumph, Vlad was forced to flee into Hungarian territory. And here is the bitter irony. He was imprisoned by his supposed ally, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, on charges that remain murky to this day. Some sources claim Matthias fabricated letters making Vlad appear to negotiate with the Ottomans. Others suggest Vlad had become such a liability that even his Christian allies wanted him removed. He spent 12 years in Hungarian captivity, not the brutal imprisonment of his Ottoman youth, but house arrest in comfortable quarters. He even married a Hungarian noblewoman, fathered children. By all accounts, he was a model prisoner, but in 1476 opportunity returned. Wallachia had devolved into chaos under a series of weak rulers. Moldavia's Prince Stephen the Great helped orchestrate Vlad's return to the throne, backed by Hungarian and Moldavian troops. Vlad reclaimed his throne in November 1476. He ruled for perhaps 2 months. December 1476 or January 1477, the exact date lost. Vlad was killed in battle against an Ottoman force near Bucharest. The circumstances remain murky. Some sources claim he was killed by his own men, either through treachery or because they mistook him for an enemy in chaos. Others claim he was overwhelmed by Ottoman soldiers. What is certain is the aftermath. His head was severed, preserved in honey, sent to Sultan maimed in Constantinople as proof of death. After everything, the terror, the impalement, the psychological warfare, Vlad ended as a trophy, displayed for mockery in the capital of the very empire he had fought his entire life. His body was allegedly buried at Snagov Monastery on an island in Romania. Excavations in the 1930s discovered a tomb, but it was empty. To this day, no one knows where Vlad's actual remains rest. So, what do we do with this story? In Romania, Vlad is often celebrated as a national hero, a brutal but effective leader who stood against impossible odds and preserved independence. Statues commemorate him. His face appears on tourist merchandise. To the rest of the world, especially after Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula loosely borrowed his name and history, Vlad became synonymous with vampirism and supernatural evil, which, in a perverse way, absolves us. It is easier to perceive him as a monster, something inhuman, than to confront the real horror. Because the real horror is this: everything Vlad did was human, painfully, terrifyingly human. He was not born a monster. He was created by a system that taught him power flows through terror, that survival demands absolute ruthlessness, that empathy is weakness. And he absorbed those lessons and refined them to their logical extreme. The forest of the Impaled was not madness. It was applied psychology. The night attacks were not random violence. They were precision military strategy. Every impalement, every mutilation, every public display of suffering was a calculated move in a larger game. And here is what should disturb your sleep. It worked. Against impossible odds, using nothing but calculated terror, Vlad turned back an empire. He proved that fear, properly weaponized, could accomplish what armies could not. The question is not whether Vlad was evil. That is obvious. The question is, what does it reveal about human nature that this method proved so effective? And what other calculated horrors are hiding in history's shadows, waiting to teach us lessons we would rather not learn? If you want to continue uncovering the uncomfortable truths textbooks bury, subscribe now. Because history's darkest chapters are not just about what happened. They are about understanding why it worked. And that is the knowledge we cannot afford to forget.